All right, class, we're going to start with section 4.7, which is graphing lines using slope-intercept form. So 4.7 is about slope-intercept form. Now, if you remember earlier in the class and earlier in the chapter, we talked about linear equations in standard form. Do you remember what form that was? Standard form of a linear equation. Standard form was this form, ax plus by equals c. Do you remember what kind of numbers a, b, and c represent? Well, they represent integers. Well, what are integers? If you remember when we studied the various sets of numbers, the first set that we studied were counting numbers, right? When we were talking about the cavemen. They had counting numbers, and then we had the number 0 added to the counting numbers and got the whole numbers, and then we had negatives added to the whole numbers, and those then made up the whole set of integers. So integers are numbers that can be positive, negative, or 0, but they're not fractions, okay? So an equation in standard form looks like this, where these coefficients of x and y are going to be an integer, and your constant here on the end is also going to be an integer. All right, now remember the other form they told you, they called it function form. Remember that? That looked like this, y equals mx plus b. And if you remember, I mentioned that they are babying you by just calling this function form. And the reason they didn't want to tell you that what it really is, which is actually slope-intercept form, which is what this section is about, is because you didn't really know what slope was yet. But you do know what slope is now and what the y-intercept is. And that's what this is. So the m, which is the coefficient of x, represents the slope. Keep in mind that slope is m. It's just the coefficient of x. It does not include x. Okay, and b represents the y-intercept. And the question is, well, why is that the y-intercept? Because remember, the y-intercept, when I'm touching the y-axis, every point on the y-axis, the value of the x-coordinate is going to be 0. So if I put a 0 right here in this equation, what's going to happen to this whole term? This whole term zeroes out, right? And y equals b, which is the y-intercept. So when x is 0, y is going to equal b, and that's your y-intercept. So this equation now is called slope-intercept form. All right, let me clear this off just a little bit. All right, so now we've got two forms of linear equation. We've got ax plus by equals c, and now we have the slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. And I like to tell my Algebra 1 students that this is the equation that you need to remember the rest of your life. This is the indication that you took an algebra class. This is a very, very important equation, y equals mx plus b. And I want you to remember it when you've got kids and they're asking you if you ever took algebra. You can immediately say, yes, I did, y equals mx plus b, so that you're going to remember that the rest of your life, and you can always say what the slope-intercept form of a linear equation is. All right, so let's take a look at example 1. And example 1 says, find the slope and the y-intercept of this equation. So in example 1, the equation is 2x minus y equals -3. Okay. So is this in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b? No, it is not. It looks like it's in standard form, right? So in this case, a is 2, b is going to be the coefficient of -y, so that's -1, and c is -3. So we want to get this in slope-intercept form. And what does slope-intercept form look like? Well, it's got y on the left and everything else on the right. So the first thing we want to do is we want to isolate this y. So we're going to subtract 2x from both sides. All right, and now I've got -y equals -2x minus 3. I'm going to start trying to write this in slope-intercept form. So in other words, I'm going to have my y term here and then x and then my constant. All right, now this is still not quite slope-intercept form, is it? Because of this negative I have in front of the y. So what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to divide every single term by -1 to get it to be positive y. So now it becomes y equals 2x, and then I got a negative and negative, so that's plus 3. So what's my slope? That's the coefficient of x. So that's 2. My slope is 2, and my y-intercept, which is b, is 3. And my slope, if I want to think about this as rise over run, I can always put this 2 over 1. So this means that my slope, I'm going to be rising 2 blocks to every 1 block horizontal on my x-axis. All right. Please resume this lesson on 4.7 instruction video number 2.